One night. One decision. One pull of a trigger. That's all it took to destroy a promising young life and send another teenager down a path that would end in chains. This is the story of Jordan Klee. A son. A friend. A football player. A boy with a bright future, cut down at just 18 years old. And it's also the story of Donta Wright, the 17-year-old who pulled the trigger, smiled in court, and dared to laugh at the family he had shattered. Tonight, we begin our journey through a case that shocked Michigan and America. If you're watching this, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the full 8-part story. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end. Jordan Klee wasn't just another teenager. He was the kind of young man parents prayed for, the kind coaches bragged about, and the kind friends leaned on. At 18 years old, he was on the verge of graduating. He had big plans, college applications, dreams of a football scholarship, maybe even a career helping others. To his teachers, he was bright. To his teammates, he was reliable. To his family, he was everything. Imagine being a parent, looking at your son in his senior pictures, smiling, full of life, talking about prom, graduation, the big wide world waiting ahead. That was Jordan. But all of those plans, all of those dreams, would end in the darkness of a single night. On the other side of this story stood Donta Wright. He wasn't much younger than Jordan, just 17. But his world was different. While Jordan looked to the future, Donta was looking for quick money. While Jordan worked toward football practice, Donta was hanging around the wrong people. Rumors of gang ties would later surface, and on that night in 2016, his choices would set him on a course that could never be undone. Donta wasn't alone. He had 2 friends with him, and together they made a choice that would change 3 families forever. They decided to rob someone. It was supposed to be just another night. Jordan was out, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. Donta and his friends were planning to target someone, maybe a quick robbery, maybe easy money. But robberies don't always go as planned. Fear, adrenaline, ego, they all mixed together into something unpredictable. Jordan was caught in their path. The confrontation was brief. Words were exchanged. Then a gun was raised. Donta Wright pulled the trigger. The bullet struck Jordan in the back of the head. He collapsed. Life drained away instantly. 18 years old. Gone. And the world around him, the world of his family, his friends, his community, would never be the same again. In moments like these, time slows down. Donta and his friends ran, but the stain of what happened would follow them forever. Jordan's body was found, and word spread quickly. His teammates received the devastating call. His parents, in the middle of planning his senior year celebrations, now had to plan a funeral. A family's world collapsed overnight. For them, there would never again be laughter around the dinner table, never another holiday with Jordan, never a wedding, never grandchildren. And for Donta? He thought he could walk away. But justice was already moving toward him. Police wasted no time. The community demanded answers, demanded justice. Witnesses came forward. The investigation unfolded quickly. Before long, Donta Wright and his 2 accomplices were arrested. At just 17 years old, Donta was charged with murder. But what shocked people most wasn't just the crime, it was his reaction. From the very beginning, he showed almost no remorse. And that would become painfully clear in the courtroom. Before we step into that courtroom in the next part of this story, let's pause here and listen to the words of Jordan's grieving mother. I've lost laughter and love. I no longer have the hope of having grandchildren. I've lost the enjoyment of holidays and birthdays. Her voice cracked. Her eyes were full of tears. But Donta Wright? He didn't even flinch. Instead, he smiled. He laughed. He acted as if none of it mattered. For a grieving family, it was salt in a wound that would never heal. This was just the beginning. A promising life ended. A family left in ashes. A teenager with no remorse. And a courtroom about to become the stage for one of the most shocking moments in sentencing history. But what really happened inside that courtroom? Why did the judge suddenly stop everything and threaten to throw out the sentencing deal? If you're still with me, I want you to take a moment. Imagine Jordan was your son, your grandson, your nephew. Imagine getting that phone call in the middle of the night. This is more than a story. This is a warning. About choices. About consequences. About the fragility of life. Don't miss the next part, A Family Shattered, as we dive into the grief, the rage, and the strength of a family who refused to be silenced. Make sure you subscribe, leave a comment, and share this story so Jordan's memory lives on. After Jordan's death, the Klee household was no longer the same. Where once there had been laughter echoing from the kitchen, football gear thrown across the living room after practice, and music coming from his bedroom, now there was silence. His mother described it best. I still set the table for him sometimes. It's like my heart doesn't want to believe he's gone. I go into his room, I see his clothes, his trophies, his football jersey. But he never comes back. Grief has a way of settling into the walls of a home. It lingers in the air, a constant reminder of absence. For parents, burying a child is unnatural. Life isn't supposed to work that way. Jordan's father, who had always been a strong figure, a provider, found himself breaking down in quiet moments. His friends said he stopped talking as much, as if the world had taken away his voice along with his son. Holidays became unbearable. Birthdays, once moments of celebration, turned into reminders of what would never come. No college graduation. No wedding. No grandchildren. A family's future had been stolen in one single gunshot. It wasn't just his family who suffered. Jordan's friends, teammates, and teachers also carried the weight. His coach recalled sitting in the locker room with the team, trying to explain why their brother wasn't coming back. Big, strong young men, athletes, reduced to tears. The school organized vigils. How could a 17-year-old, just a year younger than Jordan, take his life so casually? How could Donta Wright not only pull the trigger, but later laugh in court? Jordan's family asked themselves those questions over and over. The pain wasn't just in losing Jordan, it was in watching the man responsible show no respect, no remorse. His mother said it plainly. It's like he doesn't even care that he killed my son. That lack of remorse would soon become one of the most shocking parts of this case. When the trial process began, the family entered the courtroom with heavy hearts. They carried pictures of Jordan, sometimes wearing shirts with his face on them, desperate to keep his memory alive. But across the aisle, there was Donta, smiling. He smirked. He whispered jokes to his friends. He acted as if he were untouchable. Every time Jordan's family looked at him, they felt their pain deepen. It wasn't just murder, it was mockery. During one of the hearings, Jordan's mother took the stand. She tried to explain the depth of her loss to the judge, the jury, and to Donta himself. Her voice shook as she said, "I have lost laughter and love. I no longer have the hope of grandchildren. Every birthday, every holiday, it's a nightmare now. You stole that from us." Some people in the courtroom cried. Others bowed their heads in sorrow. And yet, Donta Wright sat there, still wearing that same smile. For the community, this trial became more than just a legal proceeding. It was a symbol of what had been lost, and of the justice they hoped would finally bring peace. How could a 17-year-old, just a year younger than Jordan, take his life so casually? How could Donta Wright not only pull the trigger, but later laugh in court? Jordan's family asked themselves those questions over and over. The pain wasn't just in losing Jordan, it was in watching the man responsible show no respect, no remorse. His mother said it plainly. It's like he doesn't even care that he killed my son. That lack of remorse would soon become one of the most shocking parts of this case. When the neighbors spoke about locking their doors more often, about being afraid to let their children out at night. Parents hugged their kids tighter, worried about the violence creeping into their neighborhoods. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a reminder that innocence can be stolen in a heartbeat. Jordan's father didn't speak as much in court. He didn't give long statements. But those who watched him said his silence was louder than words. Every day he sat in that courtroom, staring at the boy who had killed his son. His eyes were heavy with rage, but also with helplessness. What could a father do when no punishment would bring his son back? One neighbor later said. He aged 10 years in just a few months. The grief crushed him. He was never the same. And so, as the family grieved, the community mourned, and the courtroom became the center of attention, one question hung in the air. Would justice truly be served? Because soon, the trial would reveal shocking behavior that no one expected. And it wouldn't come from the family, or the jury, or even the lawyers. It would come from the judge himself. Neighbors spoke about locking their doors more often, about being afraid to let their children out at night. Parents hugged their kids tighter, worried about the violence creeping into their neighborhoods. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a reminder that innocence can be stolen in a heartbeat. Jordan's father didn't speak as much in court. He didn't give long statements. But those who watched him said his silence was louder than words. Every day he sat in that courtroom, staring at the boy who had killed his son. His eyes were heavy with rage, but also with helplessness. What could a father do when no punishment would bring his son back? One neighbor later, when Jordan's life was taken that night, police knew immediately that this wasn't just another statistic, it was a brutal execution of a promising young man. The crime scene told its own story. Jordan had been shot in the back of the head. There were no signs of a struggle, no chance for him to defend himself. His wallet and personal belongings were missing. It was clear, this wasn't random. It was a robbery. And the perpetrators weren't hardened adults, they were teenagers. Detectives worked tirelessly. They knew the community was watching. Every parent, every student, every neighbor wanted answers. It didn't take long for names to surface. In a small community, secrets don't stay hidden for long. A witness came forward, saying they had seen Jordan with 3 young men earlier that night. The description was clear enough to give investigators their first break. Rumors spread through the school halls. Whispers of who might have been involved reached teachers and parents. And slowly, the police began piecing it together. 3 teenagers. A gun. A plan to rob. And one name kept coming up, Donta Wright. At just 17, Donta was already on police radar. He wasn't a stranger to trouble. He had ties to local gangs, hung around with the wrong crowd, and carried himself with the arrogance of someone who thought the rules didn't apply to him. Detectives followed the trail. They interviewed classmates. They looked into social media. They dug into phone records. Bit by bit, the picture became clear. The robbery had been planned. Jordan had been targeted. And Donta was the one who pulled the trigger. His 2 accomplices were also arrested. Unlike Donta, they didn't smile. They looked scared. Because they knew the weight of what had happened. What came next was chilling. During questioning, Donta admitted what had happened. He admitted pulling the trigger. But what disturbed detectives most wasn't just the confession, it was his attitude. There was no remorse. No sorrow. He spoke as though Jordan's death was nothing more than an inconvenience. One officer later described it. He didn't act like someone who had made a mistake. He acted like someone who didn't care at all. When the news of Donta's arrest spread, the community erupted. Parents were horrified, not just that Jordan had been killed, but that the killer was another teenager. How could a boy so young show so little care for another's life? Jordan's school held another vigil, this time filled with both grief and anger. Students couldn't understand how someone their age could be capable of something so cold. The story spread beyond the town. Local news stations reported it. The case became a symbol of lost innocence, not only for Jordan, but for the boy who killed him. The stage was set for the trial. Prosecutors knew they had a strong case. Eyewitness accounts. Physical evidence. Danta's own confession. But what they didn't expect was the way Danta would behave once inside the courtroom. They thought they were dealing with a teenager who had made a tragic, reckless decision. Instead, they faced someone who seemed to revel in the chaos he had created. His two accomplices were also arrested. Unlike Danta, they didn't smile. They looked scared. Because they knew the weight of what had happened. What came next was chilling. During questioning, Danta admitted what had happened. Courtrooms carry a weight of silence, the kind that presses down on everyone inside. For Jordan's family, walking into that room was like reopening a wound every single day. They carried framed photos of Jordan, as if holding on to his presence could keep him alive in spirit. But across from them sat the boy who had killed him. 17-year-old Danta Wright, smirking, whispering, grinning at times when no grin should exist. It was as if the tragedy unfolding around him had no meaning at all. Jordan's mother took the stand, her hands trembling as she held her statement. The courtroom hushed as she spoke. I have lost laughter and love. I no longer have the hope of grandchildren. Holidays, birthdays, they're all just reminders of what we lost. He was supposed to go to prom. He was supposed to graduate. Now, all I have are his pictures. Her words hung heavy in the air. People in the gallery wiped tears from their eyes. Even the court reporter paused, struggling to keep her composure. But Danta? He leaned back in his chair, expressionless, almost bored. At one point, he even smirked. It was an image that would haunt the family forever. When given the chance to speak, Danta's words shocked the court. He didn't apologize. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He simply said, I'll be home soon. I love my family. That was it. Not a single word for the family of the boy he had killed. No acknowledgement of Jordan's life. No regret. Courtrooms carry a weight of silence, the kind that presses down on everyone inside. For Jordan's family, walking into that room was like reopening a wound. The gallery erupted. Jordan's family gasped in disbelief. Even the prosecutor shook his head. The judge, a man seasoned by years of dealing with criminals, sat stunned by Danta's demeanor. The smirks, the laughter, the casual disregard for human life, it was too much. He interrupted the proceedings. His voice, usually measured, carried sharp frustration. You smile and laugh and shake your head like this is no big deal. I am tempted to say I will not accept this sentence tonight. We can go to trial. And if you are convicted of murder, you will spend the rest of your life in prison. The courtroom froze. Judges rarely break from sentencing agreements. But this time, the defendant's attitude was so offensive, so callous, that the judge considered throwing everything out and starting again. For a moment, justice itself seemed to hang in the balance. Because of Danta's behavior, the judge called a recess. The court staff, the lawyers, the family, all left the room. Jordan's family sat in the hallway, trying to process what had just happened. His mother clutched a tissue, whispering prayers under her breath. His father sat stone-faced, fists clenched, as though sheer willpower was the only thing keeping him from breaking down. The tension was unbearable. Everyone wondered, would this case end in a trial? Would Danta's lack of remorse cost him the deal that had been made? When the court reconvened, the judge allowed the sentencing to continue. But the mood had shifted. The judge's warning hung heavy in the air. One more smile. One more laugh. And this teenager could be facing life behind bars. Even then, Danta barely changed. His face carried the same arrogance, the same refusal to show respect. For the family, the sentence could never match the weight of their loss. But for the first time, they saw. After the hearing, the prosecutor spoke to the press. He explained how unusual it was for a judge to even consider rejecting a sentencing agreement. He said, "This was not disrespect meant toward the family. But I think we all saw the lack of remorse." The defendant's demeanor was troubling. Troubling was an understatement. To Jordan's family, it felt like a second crime. The first had stolen their son's life. The second had stolen their dignity, forcing them to sit in a courtroom where the killer mocked them with a smile. Despite everything, Jordan's family stood strong. His mother later said that she refused to let Donta's arrogance define her son. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened next in that Michigan courtroom was nothing short of extraordinary. Judges rarely break plea agreements. Prosecutors rarely back down after months of negotiations. And yet, on that day, one teenager's smirk forced the justice system to slam the brakes. The judge looked across the courtroom, eyes burning with disbelief. Here was a 17-year-old boy, Donta Wright, charged with the cold-blooded murder of 18-year-old Jordan Klee. Court documents revealed something chilling. Wright wasn't just an impulsive teenager who made a bad choice one night. Prosecutors claimed he was associated with a local gang. They suggested that the robbery, the murder, the bravado in court, it all tied back to a lifestyle that glorified violence, intimidation, and loyalty to the streets above loyalty to the law. This revelation cut deep. For Jordan's family, it explained the coldness. It explained the smirk. This wasn't just a senseless crime, it was part of a larger culture of destruction that had stolen their son. But for Wright's defense attorneys, it became a battle cry. They argued that he was young, impressionable, and had fallen into the wrong crowd. That he wasn't beyond saving. That maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. When Jordan's family was given the chance to speak again, the words were gut-wrenching. His mother's voice shook as she said, "I've lost the laughter and the love. I no longer have the hope of having grandchildren. I've lost the enjoyment of holidays and birthdays. Everything feels empty now." This was supposed to be Jordan's year of celebration, senior pictures, prom, graduation. Instead, it became a nightmare. The courtroom fell silent. Reporters wrote those words down, knowing they would echo across the state that evening. But then came the sharp contrast. When Wright was asked if he wanted to say something, he leaned into the microphone. It was the final straw. "You may smile and laugh and shake your head like this is no big deal, but I will not tolerate disrespect in this court. You will not walk free. You will not get the easy way out." And so, instead of the plea deal, instead of the lighter sentence that had once been on the table, Wright was sentenced to 23 to 50 years for armed robbery, felony firearm possession, and second-degree murder. The courtroom exploded with emotion. Some cried tears of relief. Others shouted angrily. Wright, however, barely flinched. That same smirk lingered. Think about this, an 18-year-old young man, Jordan, was buried instead of walking across a graduation stage. A 17-year-old, Donta, threw away his life in a single reckless act. One family left with a lifetime of grief. Another family left with the shame of watching their son vanish behind prison walls. And the question that lingers, can justice ever truly be served when lives have already been destroyed? If you've been following this story so far, let me know in the comments. Do you believe the judge made the right decision throwing out the plea deal? Or should the original sentence have stood? And if this story has you hooked, don't forget, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because in the next part, we're diving deeper. We'll uncover the chilling details of the night of the murder. The choices made. The betrayal of trust. And the haunting last moments of Jordan Klee. It was the final straw. You may smile and laugh and shake your head like this is no big deal, but I will not tolerate disrespect in this court. You will not walk free. You will not get the easy way out. And so, instead of the plea deal, instead of the lighter sentence that had once been on the table, Wright was sentenced to 23 to 50 years for armed robbery, felony firearm possession, and second-degree murder. The courtroom exploded with emotion. Some cried tears of relief. Others shouted angrily. To truly understand the weight of this case, we need to go back. Back to the night that forever changed the lives of two families. It was October 2016. The air was cool, the streets of Michigan quiet, and for 18-year-old Jordan Klee, life was full of promise. He was a high-achieving student. A football player. A young man with a future, not just in academics, not just in sports, but in life itself. But that night, Jordan crossed paths with three people who would steal everything from him. Court records tell us that Donta Wright, just 17 years old at the time, was not alone. He was with two friends. Together, they had a plan. A reckless, senseless plan. They were going to rob someone. Not because they were starving. Not because they needed shelter. But because they believed it would bring them money and respect. A gang initiation, a show of power, or perhaps just the arrogance of youth mixed with danger. And tragically, Jordan became their target. Jordan had been enjoying a regular evening, the kind any teenager might have. Senior year was supposed to be a time of joy, photos, friends, dances, and the anticipation of adulthood. He had plans, maybe college, maybe football. To truly understand the weight of this case, we need to go back. Back to the night that forever changed the lives of two families. As Jordan turned, trying to leave, Wright raised a firearm. Cold metal. A split-second decision. And with one pull of the trigger, Jordan was shot in the back of the head. The bullet ended his life instantly. A young man, full of potential, crumpled to the ground. Silent. Still. Gone. For Wright and his accomplices, panic followed. The weight of what they had done began to sink in. This wasn't just a robbery anymore. This wasn't just a scare. This was murder. But instead of remorse, instead of horror, reports suggest Wright carried himself with an eerie calmness, as though even in that moment, he failed to grasp the gravity of what had just happened. Meanwhile, Jordan's body was discovered. His family's world shattered in an instant. One phone call destroyed decades of dreams. Police quickly zeroed in on Wright and his associates. Witnesses spoke. Evidence was gathered. And within days, the community knew, the bright young life of Jordan Klee had been extinguished by three reckless teenagers who thought violence was a game. The prosecutor's office charged all three. The community cried out for justice. Reporters filled the streets. And slowly, the story shifted from Jordan's promise to Wright's arrogance. Think about it for a moment. How many times do teenagers make small mistakes? Sneak out. Get into trouble. Make poor choices. But this was different. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't peer pressure gone slightly too far. This was a deliberate act of violence. And the most haunting part? Jordan never even saw it coming. Shot in the back of the head, execution style. No warning. No chance to defend himself. Is this just the story of a cold-blooded killer, or also the story of a young man who lost himself to gangs, peer pressure, and a culture of violence? One boy lies in a grave. Another sits behind bars for decades. Two lives destroyed. Two families scarred forever. And a community left to wonder, could this have been stopped? The trial of Donta Wright wasn't just about the law. It wasn't just about the facts of the night when Jordan Klee was murdered. It became something larger, a battle of morality, of perception, of community. The prosecution argued one truth. The defense tried to craft another. And in the middle sat a teenager who couldn't stop smiling. Prosecutors knew they had to build a narrative that was undeniable. They painted the picture of a young man, Wright, who had chosen violence not once, but repeatedly. They described him as part of a gang, immersed in a culture that glorified intimidation and destruction. They reminded the jury of Jordan's final moments. This was not an accident. This was not a mistake. This was execution. He shot an 18-year-old in the back of the head. That is not a child's mistake. That is murder. The evidence was strong. Witness testimony placing Wright at the scene. Forensics matching the bullet. And the damning confession Wright himself had made during initial questioning. It was clear, Wright pulled the trigger. But Wright's defense attorneys fought back with every tool they had. Their argument was simple: Wright was only 17 years old. His brain wasn't fully developed. He had been influenced by peers. He had fallen into the wrong crowd. He is not beyond saving. He is not a monster. He is a child who made a terrible mistake, and yet, their argument kept colliding with the reality of Wright's behavior in court. Time and time again, reporters noted it. Jurors noticed it. Even the judge himself couldn't ignore it. Wright kept smiling. He smirked as Jordan's mother cried. He smirked as the prosecution recounted the killing. He smirked as though he were above it all, untouchable, immune. And that smirk, more than any piece of evidence, shifted the mood of the courtroom. One juror later said, "I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. I wanted to believe he was just a kid. But when I saw him laughing, that was it for me." There was no remorse. The most heartbreaking moments came when Jordan's family was allowed to address the court once more. His mother described how holidays had become unbearable. How the laughter that once filled their home had been replaced with silence. His father spoke about the pride he felt watching Jordan play football, the joy of seeing him excel in school, and the agony of knowing he would never see him walk across a graduation stage. His sister, her voice breaking, said, "Every time I see his friends posting pictures from prom, from college, I think, that should have been my brother." The room was silent except for muffled sobs. And through it all, Wright smirked. Judges are trained to remain impartial, to keep their emotions in check. But this judge was human too. When Wright leaned into the microphone and said, "I will be home soon. I love my family," it was the final insult. No apology. No acknowledgement of Jordan. No recognition of the pain in the room. The judge slammed the gavel and spoke with a voice that shook the courtroom. "Young man, you may think this is a joke. But I assure you, this is not a game. You have stolen a life. You have shattered a family. And if you cannot show even a shred of remorse, then I cannot show you leniency." The trial was no longer just about guilt or innocence. It was about the weight of arrogance. When the day of sentencing finally arrived, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, community members, friends of Jordan. Even those who had defended Wright came to witness the moment. The judge read the charges: armed robbery, felony firearm, and second-degree murder. And then came the sentence. 23 to 50 years in prison. Gasps filled the room. Some cried tears of relief. Others shook their heads. Wright's family broke down, sobbing. Jordan's family held each other, knowing that while justice had been served, their son would never come back. And Wright? He smirked one last time. It leaves us with questions that still haunt the community today. Can a teenager truly be irredeemable? Did Wright's arrogance seal his fate more than the evidence itself? And most importantly, can justice ever feel like enough when a young life has been stolen forever? The trial was no longer just about guilt or innocence. It was about the weight of arrogance. When the day of sentencing finally arrived, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, community members, friends of Jordan. Even those who had defended Wright came to witness the moment. The judge read the charges: armed robbery, felony firearm, and second-degree murder. And then came the sentence. 23 to 50 years in prison. Gasps filled the room. Some cried tears of relief. Others shook their heads. Wright's family broke down, sobbing. Jordan's family held each other, knowing that while justice had been served, their son would never come back. The gavel had fallen. The sentence was given. 23 to 50 years. For most cases, that's where the story ends. But for the people of this Michigan community, for the families on both sides, and for everyone who witnessed this courtroom drama, the story didn't end at sentencing. In many ways, it was only beginning. In the weeks following the trial, the community was split. Some people felt relief. They said justice had been done. That a young man who showed no remorse, who laughed in the face of grief, got exactly what he deserved. Others argued the opposite. That Wright was only 17, that he was still a boy, and that perhaps prison would harden him into the very monster he was accused of being. The debate filled local papers, talk shows, coffee shops, church pews. Everywhere you went, people were talking about it. But while the community argued, two families lived with the reality. For Jordan's parents, there was no relief. No true justice. Because justice would have been their son alive, walking into the kitchen with his football jersey slung over his shoulder, asking what was for dinner. Justice would have been watching him take his senior pictures. Driving him to prom. Sitting in the audience as he accepted his diploma. Instead, they had a gravestone. Flowers that wilted too soon. Empty chairs at holidays. And the kind of silence that only comes when laughter has been stolen from a home. Jordan's mother said it best. I've lost laughter and love. I no longer have the hope of grandchildren. I've lost the enjoyment of holidays and birthdays. Everything feels empty now. And then, there was the other side. Wright's family also left that courtroom broken. They saw their son, their brother. Some of them clung to hope. Hope that prison might change him. Hope that one day he might walk free again, older, wiser, and perhaps remorseful. But for the next 2 decades at least, their family gatherings would also have an empty chair. As years passed, the story of Donta Wright and Jordan Clee became more than just a local case. It became a cautionary tale. Parents asked themselves, how do we keep our children from falling into gangs, from picking up a gun, from making choices that can't be undone? Communities asked, what more could we have done to stop this before it happened? And judges asked, when a 17-year-old shows no remorse, is there any choice but to hand down decades behind bars? For Jordan's family, their mission became clear. They would not let him be remembered as just a victim. They told stories of his smile, his kindness, his talent on the football field. They kept his memory alive at school events. Scholarships were set up in his name, ensuring that while his future was stolen, his legacy would help others build theirs. One coach said, Jordan wasn't just a good player. He was a good kid. The kind of young man you wanted your own son to grow up to be. And then there was Wright, a warning, a reminder of what happens when arrogance, violence, and lack of empathy collide. His smirk in the courtroom became infamous. It became the image reporters used to summarize the entire case. And for many, it symbolized the danger of a culture that glorifies violence and laughs at consequence. Some of them clung to hope. Hope that prison might change him. Hope that one day he might walk free again, older, wiser, and perhaps remorseful. But for the next 2 decades at least, their family gatherings would also have an empty chair. As years passed, the story of Donta Wright and Jordan Clee became more than just a local case. It became a cautionary tale. Parents asked themselves, how do we keep our children from falling into gangs? And so, we come to the end of this story. One young man lies in the ground, his future stolen. Another sits in a prison cell, his freedom gone. 2 families shattered. A community scarred. And the question that still lingers, years later. Backhand index pointing right, was justice served? Because justice can punish. Justice can balance the scales. But justice cannot bring back a life. It cannot restore a mother's laughter. It cannot return a father's pride. It cannot replace birthdays, graduations, or grandchildren that never were. What it can do is remind us. Remind us that choices matter. That arrogance destroys. That one trigger pull can ripple across generations. My friends, if you've stayed with me through this entire story, thank you. Stories like this are heavy, but they're important. They remind us of what's at stake in every choice we make, and how fragile life truly is.